Hello, my dear friend, and welcome to the Spiritually Engineered Podcast, where we take a deep dive into the human experience from a spiritual perspective. Come on in, and I invite you to stay. All right, so in today's episode, I want to talk about and explore boundaries, because this is something that's really, really important. That when it comes to boundaries, everybody has boundaries. Another way of putting it is like there's there's a place where everyone begins and ends. And I think one of the big aspects when it comes to boundaries is respect, where there needs to be some respect on it for people, because we're each like our own solar system. We're all like this complete package, if you will, not broken, not missing or anything. Because the reality is, you and I, all of us, your neighbors, friends, whomever, we're all one with all things. So to think that there's like this idea of just like, as I mentioned, broken or anything lesser than or whatever, or something's wrong, to me that's just not the case. And it's an illusion, and it's just not really, frankly, with like reality. So everybody's their own unique solar system. They have, you have your wants, like just as I do, just as your neighbors do. Have wants, needs, desires and wants being the same thing, of course. Aspirations, goals, fears, worries, insecurities, challenges. Even like growing up, what we've all have like a lot of stuff that contributes to where we are right now, currently in the present moment, right? That's part of all that. When you think about like, you are the total sum of your thoughts and feelings that you've ever experienced in all of your lifetimes, not just this one. That really does puts it in perspective. At least it does for me. So, boundaries. And so for me, an interesting experience I had or have had in the past around boundaries has been around loved ones, particularly my parents. You ever have parents that just try to, lecture you and or say you ought to do this or that, and they do it because, they genuinely. I'm not assuming that it's the case all the time, but I know generally, over concerned parents get into that. You could do this or do that, or wanting to make sure that their child, that their son, daughter, whoever is taken care of, right? I can understand from just looking at that detached perspective, right? A parent just sharing what they're sharing because they want their kid to do better than they did. I think that's that feeling, that desire is there for like the general, for the most part, right? I think most people want the best for their child, want them to thrive and do better than them. I think that's part of that desire within ourselves to pass on something practical and helpful. And yeah, so for me, when my dad would, at times, he always get into this thing where he'll tell me about this, and that. And sometimes he expresses frustrations. And, for me, it's tough because I remember I had a recent experience where he was kind of going off on me about my current situation, and and I can understand where he was coming from in some sense. And this is like how I see things when I'm listening to somebody talk. I consider a lot of things. I weigh a lot of things, right? There's some things that I can understand what my dad was talking, what was getting at. Especially when it comes to like him wanting me to be self-reliant, right? And I get that. But then there was some aspect, that for me I felt like I felt very inadequate, or I'm doing something wrong, or I'm not fitting the model of success that's like the common narrative. Get the good job, get the good high paying money, all this stuff, right? And perhaps maybe your parents were like that when they tell you that, oh yeah, get the high paying stuff here, just like, again, like the cliche, what it seems like the societal status quo kind of a thing, right? That's so not good. That's crap, you know. But still, there's truth to it, even in the midst of it being like someone telling you something and it's like feels mostly crap, and there's always a bit of tiny grain of truth in there. And that's why, like I said, like I understand where he was coming from, but at a certain point I felt like I kind of lashed out on him. I was upset. It was a moment that made me emotional. And but after all the thing, after everything was said and done, we kind of made up to one another and apologized. Because still coming back to that respect, which is something that I can appreciate about my dad. At least we can come back to that respect. Can't speak for other people. It may not be the case with other people. But where I want to go with that is like, when he was sharing and giving his 2 cents about stuff, I was reading this book, this financial book that's been like really awesome that I've been digesting slowly. And this one chapter, the author was talking about the idea of belief bubbles. So, and this is where I'm going to tie in boundaries. It's very important that you stay true and hold to your own beliefs about yourself, about the world, your values, right? I think it's a very important thing to hold fast to that and stay true to stay true to who you are, with that, because, in that instance, he was like telling me his beliefs about stuff. And, I was utilizing the little technique that the author was sharing, or the visualization that helped a lot, the analogy of a bubble. And that really helped keep things clear, and it is an important thing, especially because when it comes to connecting with people and relating, right? We'll talk about things, people will share from their perspective, and of course you may share from yours. But what's important is that when people are sharing from their perspective, and this is something that I'm learning and navigating personally in social settings and even at work. People share their own, we all experience life through our own reality, right? And when we talk about things, like I say, this is that, just like how I'm doing, right? When I share and talk, a lot of things I'm talking about, I acknowledge that it's from my perspective, how I see things, how I show up. So too is other people. And so with that, it's important to set those boundaries, and even like using the visualization of like a bubble, right? Everybody's in their own bubble. And and I think it's such an important to balance that, because otherwise I can begin to get into this outer, where I start to think all my answers and all the things are outside of me, when in reality everything I need, all the support, everything, guidance, direction, all the important things that can help me feel fulfilled, it's within myself just as much as it is within you, and just as much as it is with your neighbor. We all have a feeling part, our intuition, our inner compass that helps guide, to help us move us in a direction that's more fulfilling, that could help us to feel more joyful. That's built in each and every single one of us. That's an aspect of how we're spiritually engineered, which, by the way, is part of what inspired this podcast and name, spiritually engineered. Our own spiritual design and our makeup is set up so that we're actually meant to be successful. But the intellectual part, where our conditioning starts to happen when we're in our first 7 years. Then we start taking on limitations and all these things that contribute to our own challenges that we're experiencing right now. At least I can say for myself. I can't speak for you, but just speaking for myself and my experiences and what I've observed, right? And when I share on this podcast my perspective and stuff, that the boundaries is something I'm recognizing is something I want to honor when I'm sharing this with you. This is all my experiences, right? And you have a right to take whatever information I share and do whatever with it what you want, because it's your right, it's your responsibility to yourself to put things together, to understand the game, to play the game, to understand your life, to understand, how you show up. All that's in your control, and it's in your area of concern and your responsibility, in my opinion, just as much as it is for me, for myself, right? And so when I'm working with people, where this comes up, where this can be a bit of a challenge, is when I'm holding space for other people and empathizing, right? I don't know if you ever heard of empathy. My understanding of empathy, just so we're clear here, is like if I'm listening to someone share about something, I try to put myself in their shoes, and try to, even if I don't have an experience for it, imagine, okay, what would it be like if I was in that position? Because unless I have that experience, I won't be able to truly feel and experience what they're going through, right? That's just the reality. It is not like, doesn't make you or me or bad, right? Say if you're someone's, sharing, opening up to you about something, and you can't relate necessarily, but you're doing your best to empathize. The beautiful thing about empathy is that anybody can empathize, right? Being able to like tune into and feel kind of, like if I were in that person's shoes, how would I feel about it? Kind of a thing. At least that's how I view empathy. I'm sure that many other people view empathy entirely differently. And that's okay. Like I said, everybody has different and unique perspectives about things. I'm sharing this with you so you have a sense of where I'm at, to give you, context into, all the stuff that I've been sharing so far in this episode, and why I see things a certain way, you know. And when people share, what they're going through, and things that kind of are they're concerned about, where I don't stay true to my own boundaries, happens when I take on what they're going through. Where if, let's say, if someone's feel like they're going through a battle or something, or some kind of struggle, or I may end up trying to take on their battles or something, like, oh, let me, fight by your side and fight this thing or whatever. I think that can be not good, because, like I said, everybody's got their own inner challenges and stuff like that, and that's theirs, right? Like, my inner challenges and what I'm going through, that's for me to take care of, not for you to do anything about. Let's play around and assume, like, we're friends, right? And I'm talking to you, and I have these challenges I'm presenting to you. You're not responsible to fix my problems or anything like that, especially like if you were the outside person listening in. So if I was the outside person listening in, if someone, either indirectly or directly, and this is where it takes a bit of like intuitive sensing and awareness, if someone's asking for help, I always come into it like with that sense of wanting to offer guidance only. I really want to just offer advice, because to me it's like, I don't know, it might be some kind of imposter syndrome kind of a mentality or something, but when I always share something to help, it's like, what would I do in that situation? That's like how I would approach it, rather than say you should this or you should that, because I can't tell you how to live your life. Nobody can tell you how to live your life, just as much as nobody can tell me how to live my life, And that was part of why I lashed out on my dad, because I was feeling that energy from him, of him telling the imposition that was there. And I kind of was like, all right, I'm not going to put up with this. And so I lashed out at him. And then, of course, again, like, I apologized afterwards. Sometimes things happen, emotions, come up. And I think the important thing is to honor them, right? Not suppress them or invalidate or anything like that. Like, all these important soft skills when it comes to relationship dynamics, regardless of who it is, but especially, when it comes to loved ones, close families, or if perhaps you have a partner or a spouse, whomever, especially them, because they're the ones that can give us the most challenges, because I care, for me, I care so much about my loved ones and those close to me. I give a damn. And oftentimes I find myself being over concerned. I think that's what happens when we care about things, at least in my opinion. When I care about things, I have to be careful not to fall onto the side of being over concerned, but instead sit into that balance of true concern. Neither too worried, but also not being so apathetic or careless, but having just that concern enough to, like, okay, what can I do here? What can I do about it? you know, and I really want to tie in the air of like the practicality, you know. So, well, with empathy, I think it's important that it's an important thing to have that quality, right, with people, to connect, to be there, to hold space. Empathy is great, but I think it's also equally important as you're holding space for someone, you do that same for yourself at the same time, meaning the whole boundary thing. So, like if someone shares something about, oh, this economy or this, or maybe, like I'm bringing an example for myself, or somebody talks about money or something like that, I honor them and say, okay, this is where this person is at, right? And then I remember and tune into like how I feel about, let's say, the said topic. Because whatever, perhaps, if I'm sharing something with you, let's say on a particular topic, it doesn't matter what, right? On a particular topic, you don't necessarily feel the same way about, me, right? But again, I don't want to invalidate that person, even though I don't feel that same way about them, right? Because we definitely, I don't think that doesn't make for good connecting and relating with people. And so, all of this to say, at this point in the episode, it's definitely important to just think about this, because when we're connecting with people, one of the things, the areas that can get affected for me with empathy and boundary setting and understanding where I begin and end, my solar plexus can really take on the stuff. My solar plexus chakra, the identification chakra. What is it that I identify with? But it's like one of the aspects of the identification chakra is to be able to freely identify with other people, but not get so caught up in taking on their stuff, right? And why I'm saying all of this, something else that is a reality is that everybody is spiritually sensitive. We pick up things, emotions, feelings, perspective, concepts, beliefs. Look at our first 7 years, for example. We pick up the concepts of those near us. And I think we can even become more susceptible to pick up those stuff from people that are close to us, that we care about, that we love. And I find it interesting how I read up on stories online about people in relationships, and how I see examples of people trespassing each other's boundaries, where there's a lack of boundaries being held in like romantic relationships. And to me, that's like, there's a lot of concepts that people have like in relationship dynamics, as if like boundaries are like shouldn't have to be so clear, or they're like, or blurred. But I think even in romantic relationship settings, boundaries need to be upheld even more, because then otherwise I see like issues of like entitlement come up, and a lot of disrespect, and a lot of just this feeling of just, I don't know, just people feeling powerless in situations that's not really conducive. I think a relationship needs to be like a sanctuary. If it's not a place to feel safe and heard and seen and all the things, and the boundaries respected and honored, I don't think that's a very healthy relationship. So it's definitely, but I don't know if where you're at with this, but it's definitely something to think about when you're working with people, because these are important soft skills to be able to like hold my own boundaries, stay true to myself, while also holding space for the other individual, because those two things can happen at the same time. I don't have to sacrifice who I am, what I'm about, when I'm holding space for somebody. I don't have to give up or sacrifice anything of myself and my values when I'm being empathetic towards somebody. But as I mentioned, it's so important, because for me, where I can fall into the issues that I start taking on and identifying with someone's own challenges, right? This is where you can end up, like imagining for yourself, like you're sitting with emotions and stuff, and like, trying to use the important soft skills to work through emotions, but come and find out they were never yours to begin with. Have you ever found yourself in a situation like that, where you're like sitting with emotions, like using those important soft skills, right? With working with emotions, emotional intelligence, And imagine you doing that, and come to find out those emotions and stories and beliefs had nothing to do with you. Can you relate with that? It's just so, all of that. I think it's important to just make sure to hold those boundaries so that ultimately, I think it's not to waste time. Because you could be, because when if I'm doing the healing work, right, and I don't know we're all doing the healing work in this journey. But God damn it, if I'm out here doing healing work for stuff that doesn't belong to me, what the hell am I doing? This is why it's important to have a good cleansing practice where you come back home to yourself. It's such an important thing because as we're mixing with people, it's very easy because of our own spiritual nature. It's very easy. It's part of the aspect. It's part of the game. It's part of reality. And and that's not something to fight or resist because I know I've done that before in the past. One way of doing that is like I start to graspingly look for something to try to like, I gotta get this energy away from me. Oh, this is that, or like, I try to treat it as if it's like a demon or something, or I need to like fend off or fight off. Oh my God, I gotta fight this off. This thing is, oh my energy of growth. Like what the, you know what I mean? Like if I start having these like dislikes and likes and dislikes, and I start painting these emotions on this stuff, on other people's energies and stories, then that's when I'm actually catching them, and I become caught. I become anchored about earthly things, and all that is bondage, is ignorance, and all that leads to ultimately is suffering. Suffering. Whereas the level of the universe of heaven is freedom. Freedom. And I think that right there is also why we have boundaries. Everybody has boundaries. You have boundaries. It's in your best interest that nobody crosses them. It's in your best interest that you understand your boundaries, that you understand where you begin and end with people. So you can experience balance and fulfillment in your relationships with other people. But again, just talking about freedom though, because you are a free soul, and this is a spiritual key when it comes to our commonality, what we all share. We are all free. Nobody can control anybody. Our own freedom is ours. What can happen is that we can give our own freedom willingly to somebody outside of ourselves. But at the end of the day, our freedom is our own to claim and to maintain and to have. So, your own boundaries, where you begin and end, it matters just as much as with any other individual. And you can practice it, you can have that, and then have and be empathetic and connect with people and be there for others, no matter what they're going through, no matter their perspective and their outlook on life. You can still be there for other people and hold that space. But just remember, when you're doing that, just don't forget yourself. Remember where you begin and end as you work with people. That way you don't get yourself so heavy-hearted. All the stuff that's like that happens out here, on this planet, the energy. And have your, I think, it's just like, rather than having it heavy, like have your, it's like the only way out is up, to rise up. You could say rise up in frequency, all the things, right? Rise up your vibration, your energy, to the level, to the extent where our angels are, our master souls, where they operate out of, where the universe operates in. Crystal clear, pure, kingdom of heaven type stuff. You know what I mean? I was like, kingdom of heaven type shit. So I'll leave it there for this episode. This is something that, I'm always learning, and I definitely wanted to get this out to people because it's such an important thing when it comes to relationship dynamics, all sorts. And so this has been another episode of Spiritual Engineered. I'm your host, Alvin Cepeda, signing out. And as always, take care, my dear friend.